All right, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you enjoyed your lunch. We are lucky to have Richard Piatt speaking to us next. Richard is a public information officer at the Attorney General's office, and as you hear him and as you see him, those who have been in Utah for some time will probably recognize his deep, reassuring voice as a former reporter for KSL. I'll let him talk to us about that. It's one of the reasons why we asked him to come and speak, is he's going to have a very unique perspective in talking to us as prosecutors about bias and the media and how we can work with reporters. So, Richard, I will let you introduce yourself further, and we'll get started. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me to your conference and also for accommodating me on Zoom today. As Bob mentioned, yes, I was a reporter for a long time at KSL. I left in 2014 to take a role being the communications director for Congresswoman Mia Love, which was a vast difference in what I was doing and a pretty significant career change, one that I didn't realize how significant it was. And then now I've transitioned to the Attorney General's office. So I have a unique position in the sense that I have seen both sides, and I know where you're coming from, and I know where the reporters are coming from. So a lot of what I'm going to say today may be sort of a little bit something you already, I feel like maybe it would be stuff that you already know, but I think it needs to be said, but I'm eager to answer questions. Also, when we're dealing with the subject of bias, I think the reality is that it's going to exist, and there's sometimes not much you can do about it, but I think you can mitigate it and you can process it in your head differently so that it doesn't become something that bothers you so much. So as prosecutors, I do know that especially now with COVID, there's a lot of different challenges that you're facing right now. You're facing cases that are all very different. The volume of them can be overwhelming. You have enough to do inside the courtroom without having to worry about the media outside the courtroom. All of us are concerned about media coverage and the potential bias of the coverage, and on a lot of times it ends up being a very difficult case where you're dealing with all this. It's unwelcome pressure for you in addition to everything that you're facing. And a lot of you, I understand, are understandably gun shy because of not only your previous experience or maybe some anxiety about dealing with the media, but because of the rules of conduct that you have to follow. But the reality of today's media and social media environment that I think that we all need to remember, it's wise to be conscious of all of our outward facing actions as you walk out of the courtroom, whether you're in the courtroom, whether you're on the street. A lot of us are public figures. When the pressure is on, whether you like it or not, if you're in the office or if you're in public or at a restaurant, somebody may point at you and say, hey, that's the guy or that's the person, that's the man or woman that prosecuted this particular case. So as human beings, we all know that bias exists. And because it exists, there are always going to be accusations and counter accusations that someone's being biased because of the way they acted, what they wrote, what they did. And it cuts both ways. As prosecutors, you yourself may have been accused of bias. You may be accused of overcharging someone, as we've seen, for political reasons or for other reasons. There could be a difference of opinion about whether a person is charged or should be charged. And the public may cite as a reason the person's characteristics. You're harder or you're softer on one person or another than you should be. Conversely, reporters feel like prosecutors are biased against them somehow. They may feel like they're being frozen out. As you walk into the courtroom, you're trying to abide by the rules of conduct. You just walk in, you don't acknowledge anyone. They take that as that they're being frozen out and that everyone in law enforcement is biased against them. And sometimes reporters take it personally. It's natural for you to feel like you don't want to speak to a reporter because of a previous encounter also with them or other people at a particular station. It's easy to believe that reporters can't be trusted or that reporters as a group have an agenda or from a particular organization. And it's easy to see something that you don't like in a news story as biased and write off all journalists as being bad. So as a PIO and someone who is on the other side, I urge you to resist the temptation to feel that way and to react as much as possible. As I mentioned, there are legitimate legal reasons for you not to want to talk about a case or not be able to talk about a case. And if that's the case, if it's a touchy situation, I don't think you should worry about that. You should just tell them that. But I think the key is being willing to speak at least off the record or in some way to a reporter. It's much better than freezing them out. And I know, again, a lot of you don't want to deal with it, but I've had things that I was covering and cases that I was covering, and the prosecutors snuck out the back way or out some alternate door and basically walked out, and it felt like they were running away from the reporters. Again, I get it, but it's just not a good look for you. If you come out and at least say something, even if it's to explain that you can't talk, then it's better than nothing. And I submit to you that as a reporter, I found that deliberate bias is far less common. I can't really recall anyone that I felt like had an agenda, for example. But what I did find, and what I find now in my current role, is that there is definitely a lack of understanding or a lack of knowledge about the justice system and the way it works. Reporters sometimes assume that prosecutors and judges are allowed to do things or aren't allowed to do things that they assume that judges or prosecutors are allowed to do things that they can't do. They just can't do. And so their reporting may reflect that unless they are educated otherwise. There are misconceptions about the roles of prosecutors and defense attorneys sometimes and about the process itself. So partly due to the current political climate that we're in, where everything seems like it's contentious, and possibly due to a lack of understanding, that plays into it as much as anything. People have entered into a situation very often with a preconceived notion of what they think is going on, and they don't have anybody countering that, and so stories end up the way that they do. The news business has a lot of turnover. I had 30 years of experience in the news business. I'm no longer there. A lot of the people that I worked alongside are no longer there. These are people who worked in the justice system, who worked as reporters, who understand the way it works. You don't have that now. You've got reporters that are very, very young, who are new. They're young. It seems like they're getting younger and younger. And like, as I get older and older, I keep thinking there was a reporter I saw the other day, and I thought, what is that guy, 12? But they're very, very young. And turnover in newsrooms is very, very high, which means that there are people in the business, in fact, all the time. The business isn't the same as when I was there, when I was in my heyday. Reporters also, you need to understand, face their own challenges when it comes to the stories that they're reporting on, how they're assigned, the deadlines. If there's a story that's been in the news, there's pressure from managers and producers to come back with a certain angle. I heard X, Y, and Z. You need to go out and get X, Y, and Z. And then you get out to the story, or you get to the hearing, and it's not X, Y, and Z. And so reporters are facing a difficult time explaining to their superiors or to people that are like actively pressuring them that such is not the case. And a lot of producers don't want to accept that. And so the reporters will try to fit a square peg in a round hole sometimes, and it just doesn't work that way. Again, if you're able to break down those misconceptions when you can, it's very helpful. I think a lot of reporters do want to be educated. I really, really appreciated people that took the time to sit down with me and explain what was going on. I was very fortunate in that I was able to engender trust from many prosecutors and lawyers, and they were willing to take me off to the side and say, look, here's what's really going on. You can't report this. And I honored that. But that background, even if it's background that you legally can't say by rules of conduct, but you think might be helpful, if you're able to do that, if you're comfortable to do that with an individual, it really does help give perspective on cases so that you're not just reporting something that's wrong. Because wrong things get reported because they just don't know. And the narrative may already exist through those news managers or through assumptions or through a previous report that was inaccurate, and it just keeps getting furthered because it's not being corrected. And so a problem does arise if you have a reporter who's gunning for a story, who's going for it, and comes to you and you feel like it's conflicting with the rule. And so the story, and if you are not able to talk, that happens. But if a reporter is getting an interview with the defense attorney, who, as you know, are allowed to say basically whatever they want, or even worse, with a family member of a victim, if there's a sexual assault case, for example, or something, or a child's involved, you can't really say anything, but the family is saying all kinds of stuff and you're not able to, then that's going to color that story. And quite honestly, I don't really know what can be done about that. It's tempting for me as a PIO, when I hear the stories of prosecutors, to want to caution the reporters on their reporting. If I see a story, then I'll call them very often and tell them the inaccuracies. But I guess once it's out there, it's kind of out there. And with the internet, if a story has been published online, then it's out there. So there's not really that much you can do about it. If it's published in print, there's really nothing you can do about it. If it's an online story, then they can run a correction and they can correct it so that it's not just hanging out there in perpetuity. And we want to do that wherever we can. If we see an error, an outright error, that needs to be corrected. And that's part of our job. And I would encourage you that if you have a PIO, to try to tap into them. If you don't have a PIO, then you can call me and ask my advice. I'm at the Attorney General's office. You can email me or let me know what kind of dilemma you're facing. I'm willing to help you. We're an office that deals with a specific caseload, and we don't have anything to do with what's going on. But I can be a friend to you and tell you what I can give you. My opinion on what's going on. I think that you sometimes need somebody like that to talk to. And I would encourage you that I guess what I found is in a lot of the cases that you cover, there is a lot of things that you can't say, but there are things that you can say. For example, if it's a crime and there's a probable cause statement that's been issued, or that's public, I should say, you can generally say things that are within the confines of the probable cause statement. But that's going to require you to prepare in a different way than you are for the courtroom, and that's asking you to do extra work, I realize. But that at least gives you something to say. Come up with some kind of canned answer, so that even if it's as simple as if a reporter comes up to you and says something like, well, the defense says that X, Y, and Z happened, and the probable cause statement says something else. The defendant was somewhere else. Something else happened. Blah 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 blah. You can say simply, That's not the case. We believe that the evidence shows that's not the case. So then you're going to get into further questions, and it's uncomfortable for you to break away at that point. If you feel like you've exhausted that, you need to have somebody there with you. Don't feel like you need to do this alone. You need to have someone that's willing to act as, an assistant to you to pull you away. I know from personal experience, dealing with reporters can be very, very difficult. If you're very limited about what you can say, they're naturally going to push you to say more. You need to be disciplined. It's hard. You need to be disciplined, but you need to keep yourself to that and just say, I'm sorry, that's it. And if they complain and whine and everything, that's just too bad. But I think that the fact that you're saying anything at all is still better than not saying anything at all. The legal nuances of a case can be very, very complicated. And if you can't talk about it at length, then those nuances are going to get lost in coverage in a TV story that's like 25 or 30 seconds long. So again, communicating with them to whatever extent that you can, is better. It's also difficult when a TV reporter just wants a quick soundbite, and you deal with that. But then you have a print reporter that wants to ask so many questions that it sounds like they're writing a book or something. Again, with print reporters, I find that to be probably a mixed bag. Sometimes it's better if they're able to give a nuance to a story and explain it a little bit more, but it's also during the question and answer process problematic potentially, because they're always going to try to get you to say more than you're willing to say and ask the questions in a very creative way. So, as I mentioned before, there is built-in bias in reporting. Sometimes it's personal bias that the person brings with them because of who they are. For example, one reporter in one of our stations has fancied himself, at least in the past, I don't know if this is still the case, as the crime and punishment reporter. So he's basically implying that the system is punitive. It's either punitive or nothing. So that kind of casts a little bit of a shadow on what he's doing, because he's assuming that the system is a certain way and that his reports are gonna back that up, and that's for promotions purposes. And the individual that I'm referring to is very difficult to deal with because he is not open. And I'm very matter of fact with this individual, and don't feel bad about just giving him what I can give him and nothing more. So like I said, we've got this particular slide up, so I might as well talk about it. And this is kind of going in the vein of educating reporters. So this particular case, many of you may have been aware of. It's the case of a gentleman that was, well, he's not really a gentleman, I guess, who was charged with downloading and possessing and passing along, more than 10,000 at least. I think he had more than what the headline says there. He had tens of thousands of files, and he was trading them and whatnot. But this coverage ended up being a viral situation that went nationwide, and everyone involved in the case was well aware that this was the case, and it had to do with the sentence that he got. He pleaded guilty, and his sentence followed the sentencing guidelines. But the viral message that was going around and around was that he got a light sentence because he was a CEO. So this reporter assumed that this guy, because he had owned his own business, was a CEO. He wasn't really a CEO in the tradition that you and I may think is a CEO. And the sentencing followed the sentencing guidelines. So it was this point of outrage for a lot of people nationwide that this guy got off light because of who he was, when in fact that wasn't the case. The people that worked on this case did everything right. The judge was, I think, the judge faced a huge backlash, and I think it inserted itself into his personal life over this. So this story, in my opinion, what came about and unfolded the way it did because of a lack of understanding about the way that sentencing guidelines work. And I don't know if this reporter even really cared to educate himself about that. But this is not going unnoticed. Situations like this are going to happen. It's very unfortunate for the prosecutors and for the judge that's involved. But I do know that just this week, yesterday as a matter of fact, the Society of Professional Journalists, SPJ, held a seminar for journalists to talk exclusively about sentencing and the way sentencing in Utah works, the role of the Sentencing Commission, how it works. So there is light at the end of the tunnel, I guess, in the sense that we're slowly trying to piecemeal away at educating these reporters. The journalism community recognizes some of these failings as well. I just talked to a couple reporters and editors, and they know that there's sensitivity about things like this. Once it goes viral, there's not much you can do. But I think an understanding about sentencing will go a long way, and would have gone a long way in this particular case, as long as the reporter has integrity. I guess this case was just too sensational for them to resist, and that's unfortunate. So I want to submit to you that there is an effort on most of the reporters for bias coverage. The reality is that you're never going to be able to completely control the kind of coverage that your particular case or situation gets. I just encourage you to control what you can control, and if you feel like you're out of control, ask for assistance. And that's all I have. I'm wondering if anybody has any questions on this.
So I had a couple that came in, and you kind of addressed it. One question is, how do you educate reporters? You talked about the young reporters that may not know, what our ethical rules are, what we're able to do, but how would you suggest, doing that? And maybe that goes along with another question I got was, how do you foster a relationship with somebody from the media? Whether is it different for on-camera reporter versus a print media? So those two questions.
So do many of the agencies that you're referring to, Bob, do they have PIOs available?
No, most of these, excuse me, just small agencies. I mean, there may be a PIO attached to the police department, but I think other than the big counties, they don't have separate PIOs.
So that's tough. Most reporters will honor an off-the-record request. It's just, there can be an adversarial sort of tone or feeling when you approach I think when I was a reporter, I never tried to make it about me as much as it seems to be the style to do now, what the individual thinks about something. But I think there's a lot of different personalities out there, and people aren't comfortable doing this. But if you know that the case that you're talking about is going to be tough, and that there's going to be publicity, then just going out and saying, look, off the record, I just want an idea. I'm the prosecutor in the case. I just want to know what kinds of questions that you're going to have or that you're going to ask after this hearing. You don't have to answer them, but if you have the time, just talking to them and asking them. You shouldn't be afraid to ask the reporters the kinds of questions that you're going to ask before they start. And I'm a TV guy, so I keep thinking, my on-the-record venue is the camera. It's okay for you to say, before we start rolling, I want you to tell me what you're going to ask me. I want to know what kinds of questions, because I can't answer all the questions. And you need to understand that I can't answer all the questions. But I'm willing to talk to you and tell you what I can, but we need to have an understanding that before I go on the record or go on camera, I can't talk about some of this stuff. And then hone it down into getting information from them about what, coming to sort of an agreement about that. It's going to require you to try to build a relationship with them ahead of time. And you may not have time to do that. That's the best way, though, is just going out and realizing that these reporters are actually, they want to be friendly with you to the extent that they want information. When you're a reporter on deadline, you're under a lot of pressure from the station to get the story. The station's expecting you to come back with something. So if you present yourself as someone who's kind of solving their problem in a way, then you can be seen as a friendly person. The whole thing about, I know that there are prosecutors and people in law enforcement that really don't like dealing with the media because they feel like they've been burned in the past. And so that whole demeanor of just walking in some back door of the courtroom and leaving by the same door, or feeling that you're, I remember one time I don't even remember what case it was, but we took pictures of the prosecutors walking away from us. It was their backs walking down the hall, and I used the video and said the prosecution ran away before we could talk to them. I mean, you don't want that. And so if you can develop a relationship with at least one of them. So if it's a real high profile case, if you get Ben Winslow from Fox 13 on the scene, he's very reasonable. He has integrity. My experience with him is I knew him when he was like a reporter at KSL Radio and had different colored hair every week. And sometimes it was in a mohawk, and sometimes it was, super long. So I've known him for a long time, and he really does want to be a good reporter. So there are people out there that, that you can talk to. So I guess that's a long way of saying, if you can, talk to them as people first before you go out there. You're able to do that. You're able to say, in Utah, we're actually pretty lucky with the report. The reporters aren't so sharky. When I was in DC, I was shocked at how vicious these guys were. And I got burned a couple times too, because I wanted to be as open as I could. But you have to be careful what you say to them. Does that make sense?
It does. Let me ask a follow-up. So, you talked about prosecutors are hesitant to talk to a reporter if they feel like they've been burned. In your experience, is it worth a prosecutor's time to contact that reporter after the fact and just say, hey, look, you took what I said out of context, or that's not what we meant, or whatever the grievance is that the prosecutor has with the reporter? Is that worth our time, or are we just wasting our time?
No, I think it's a good use of your time. And if you don't want to talk to them, you can email them. Or if someone has your number, well, you probably don't want to text them. Email or talk to them. Call them up and say, some of the biggest learning experiences that I had was when something like that happened. Because we're all people here in the end. I'm reporting on you. I want to do a good job. And if for whatever reason I'm off the mark, then you're doing me a kindness by letting me know that. No one wants to be wrong. I always took being accurate very seriously, because even though I knew that if I said something, most of the people out there wouldn't know the difference, there's always somebody who does. So I always felt like I was accountable to that person. There's one situation that I had where there was a story that had to do with the Department of Corrections, and there was some like 85-year-old guy who was still molesting little girls, and he was doing it in his garage or something like that. He was on probation, and I don't even remember what the story was, but the story was that basically he got released and then molested again. So, and there was some nuance to the story that the PIO at Corrections at the time, Jack Ford, told me was not the case. But I had people telling me that it was the case, and it looked like it was, and I reported it. And Jack called me up and reamed me out. You reported that incorrectly, and you knew that it was incorrect. I told you that it was incorrect. Well, I appreciated that, but the thing is that I had information that was telling me the opposite. So my fault as a reporter was perhaps not putting it in the proper context.
Okay.
But Jack was right to call me. If I was wrong, I deserve to know that I was wrong. So I don't think it's a waste of time. But I realize that people are really busy.
Yeah. Okay. And then the second question I had, and then I see that we've got a couple others from the audience, is in this day and age when prosecutors are accused of misconduct, error, things like that, and we understand why that gets reported. It's it's sexy. But what about when we're doing the right thing? Like, for example, when an office has like a citizens academy to bring the citizens in, to teach them about what government does with prosecutors, law enforcement, or another example is as a statewide association of prosecutors, we've adopted best practices that we're encouraging prosecutors to comply with, as well as looking at some ethical guidelines. That doesn't make for sexy reporting, but that kind of counterbalances this message that prosecutors are committing all kinds of misconduct. I mean, how do we get that message out?
Do you have standards?
Yes, we do. I mean, and we're following those standards and trying to even be better in areas that we can. It's just, like I said, that doesn't make for your average person probably doesn't really want to see that and hear that. Or at least maybe not on the evening news.
You're kind of talking about the kind of story where if a plane crashes, then we're all over it, but we're not doing the story on 1,000 planes landed and took off safely at Salt Lake International Airport.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, one of our members actually wrote an article, I think it was in the Utah Bar Journal just recently, looking at recent allegations of prosecutorial misconduct, and the way that the author wrote it makes it sound that it's rampant. But when you compare, particularly in Utah, it's an incredibly low number. And so,
all right, so it's unfortunate, but if they're probably not going to do a story on how great prosecutors are on a daily basis, because it's sort of seen as expected. But when this other person was written up, or whatever the process is, then that's an opportunity for you to point out the facts that you're stating. So it would be a good counterbalance within that story.
Okay.
So so if that story's out there and that reporters are going to be writing about it, then it's appropriate for you to call the reporter and say, hey, I know that you're doing a story on this bad guy or bad person or this misconduct. We believe it's a one-off, and here's the facts that we have to back it up. It's very much like the police stories that are going on right now. Even with these charges of police brutality, gosh, these police officers are just getting lambasted. All of them are being cast as bad. But the reality still is the vast majority of police officers aren't like the ones that are getting into trouble. And so you just have to keep, repeating that. People are so cynical now, and they've heard it so often that with regards to police officers. But when it comes to prosecutors, I think it's still worth a phone call to say, we've got pretty good people in the state, and here's the data that I have to back it up.
Okay. Thank you.
That would be useful. It provides perspective. Any additional perspective is welcome. So you shouldn't feel bad about but you're going to have to be proactive. They're not going to think to call you, probably.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Marilyn.
That's extra work. It's extra work, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Okay, one question. Can you give us more examples of prepared answers to reporters?
Well, it just depends on what you feel like you can say. You need to decide what you can say about a case. If the defense lawyer speaks first, like a lot of prosecutors or a lot of attorneys I've noticed will sort of hang back until if the defense lawyer is interviewed first, they'll sort of hang back just so that they can hear what they're saying to the media, so that then they can counter it. So that's a technique that you can use. You can just sort of let the defense lawyer go first. If you don't have the luxury of that, or if you don't have a reporter that's saying, well, the defense attorney says that this and this and this happened, and he's being railroaded or something like that, then there's things in the probable cause statement that you should be able to pull out. And even if you have to say, the evidence doesn't show that. I mean, that's safe to say, I think. Each case is different, so I don't really have any specific examples, but it would be easier if you listen to what the defense attorneys said first, and then we're able to counter it. But just look at what's already public, or what you look at and have decided for yourself isn't going to compromise the rule. Unfortunately, we can't comment on the details of the case, but it's safe to say that this defendant would not be sitting in a courtroom right now if we didn't think that we were able to get a conviction. Something like that. Well, why do you say that? Why, what is it about the case? Well, we have a probable cause statement that outlines the facts of the case. If you read the probable cause statement, then you'll find that this person, and to whatever extent you can go into it, whatever it says, his fingerprints were on the weapon. It takes practice for you to. What I'm saying is, canned answers. Each case is going to be different, right? But you need to decide what you can say ahead of time, and you need to practice being disciplined to keep yourself just to that. It's very tempting to go on and on about it, right? We know that this guy had it. We know that this guy had a gun and his fingerprints were on. And it's tempting to say. And he obviously pointed it at the guy and pulled the trigger 9 times. And, you don't need to say any of that. Less is more. So preparing your answers ahead of time in the context of the probable cause statement, disciplining yourself to stay within that. It takes practice, it's hard, but you can do it.
Okay, thank you. Any questions here in the audience? I don't think so. All right, Richard, hey, thank you so much.
I hope this is helpful to all of you. But I do want to say that that if you have, each case is different, so it's all going to be different. These are all like broad brushes, and I'm talking a little bit idealistically, but I'm willing to talk to you about the way things are going for you. Unfortunately, that doesn't really arise unless you're already, you already feel like you're drowning a little bit. But I think in today's environment, it's just going to be building relationships and being prepared to deal with them. Unfortunately, in today's environment with social media and all these other media channels out there, you just kind of need to resign yourself to the fact that you're going to have to deal with them in some way. And if you don't deal with them proactively, then dealing with them after the fact is just going to make you feel very frustrated.
Okay.
So don't be afraid to speak to them, as people within the guidelines of the rule.
Right. And actually, we now have one more question, please.
You just mentioned building relationships, but you also mentioned the turnover amongst reporters. So first of all, why is there such a high turnover rate? And with that turnover, how is the best way for us to try to build relationships?
Okay, I don't know. Could you hear that, Richard?
Well, yeah,
Not all of it?
the turnover rate and building relationships. I don't mean building long-term relationships. I mean at least building a rapport. Maybe I should have said building rapport with them. Some people like somebody like Winslow that's been around forever now. Pat Reevy, I don't know if any of you deal with him. I don't know who to say at the Tribune, but some of those people I would characterize it as a relationship. Other people, the people that are standing on the sidewalk outside or standing out in the hallway, it would be more like building a rapport with them, just in the moment. The turnover is so high because as the media environment has gotten more difficult and the ownership, the corporations that are owning these stations are trying to figure out how to make more and more money, they're paying less and less. And so it's very much a ladder climbing game where they're using KTVX as a springboard to go to KPIX in San Francisco. And from KPIX, they're hoping to go to the network somewhere, So these people are ambitious. They think that they're going to be the next Katie Couric or something. And so they're ambitious. So it's good to communicate so that you can kind of tone down that ambition. I think that that Saltzman slide that I put up, the sentencing example, these people everybody wants to write some splashy headline that's going to make them the next Woodward and Bernstein or something, If you deal with somebody like that, then then you're just sort of, you kind of have to deal with them as best as you can. But most of them just don't understand. They want to understand. So that's all I'm talking about.
Okay. Well, I think that, anybody else? Okay. Again, thank you, Richard. Appreciate your time, and hope you enjoy your conference. Okay, everybody, we will be on break until 2:15 when we will hear from Representative Pitcher and Kiza Williams. So we'll see you in about half an hour.